So now it's my great honor to introduce our first speaker, who actually, if you didn't see him at the party last night, it's because to be here, he flew directly over from Bangkok and had some jet lag. So he's awake now. I'm very proud to introduce Richard Hughes, who speaks around the world at all kinds of conferences, gemstones, asset class conferences, minerals, scientific conferences, and I believe he is the world authority on corundums, which are commonly known as the more glamorous names, ruby and sapphires. Richard?
Thanks very much, Rob. Just a quick thanks to Rob and Monica, Jean, and all the people that have put this together. It's really a wonderful event, and I hope that it won't be the first time that I have a chance to speak here.
Time to live off. Time to live off. Time to lift off.
I've come 10,000 miles, 10,000 kilometers to get here. It took about 24 hours. I've been doing this 38 years now, and I have 45 minutes to tell you about what I do. It's a little bit difficult, but I always remember the old man on the mountain when he was chasing Betty Boop. And there was one episode when he actually caught her, and she said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to do the best I can." Younger people in the audience probably don't understand that, but anyway. Biographical part of the program. I'm from my parents who are here today. My parents made me. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. 1976, at age 18, I started traveling around the world. University could wait. I ended up in Nepal. 1977, I visited Burma. Ended up in Bangkok. And 1979, I started studying gemology. A lovely young lady signed me up for my first gem course, and we're now married. And we produced this lovely little girl, my daughter Billy, who is also now a gemologist. That is a family. Family is people. My gemology is actually a combination of gems and people. I call it humanistic gemology. And here's a short sampling from Madagascar.
Silence remains. Because I have to listen to him. I have to listen to the silence. I have to experience him.
There's only one thing I want for you. I want for you. I love the way you dream. I love the way you dream. I love the way you dream. And I love the way you dream. One for you, one for me, one for you, one for me, one for you.
Gives you a little picture of my world. If we are going to understand corundum crystals and ruby and sapphire crystals, we should understand a little bit about geology. Here's a map of Gondwana, and you can see the location of many important localities. This is about 700 million years ago. And you can see that Madagascar, East Africa, southern India, Sri Lanka were all together. They're basically cousins. After the Indian subcontinent broke away and headed north, you had this massive collision that produced all of the ruby and sapphire localities in Asia. And so these are a result of the Himalayan orogeny, which happened relatively recently in terms of geologic time. So we have ruby deposits at Jagdalek, Kukurt, Hunza, Nangimali in Pakistan, Shumar in Nepal, and of course Mogok Mainshu in Burma, and Lukien, Vietnam, and southern China. So those are most of the key ruby and sapphire deposits in Asia, but they're much younger than the deposits that were formed in East Africa. Sri Lanka produces some of the finest crystals that you'll ever see for ruby and sapphire. The entire southern part of Sri Lanka is gem-bearing, and there are many famous places that produce beautiful crystals in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is really interesting because you get some very fine glassy crystals that are beautifully preserved, and then you also have some material that is so water-worn that there's no trace of the crystallization at all. Just recently, a few days ago, I learned of another find of corundum in Trincomalee in the north. And if this plays out, this will be the farthest north that they found corundum, and it might actually open up exploration all the way from Elahara on to the north. This is some specimens from Bill Larson's collection, and here you can see the typical form of sapphire crystals that come from Sri Lanka. Most of them are bipyramidal, and you also have a couple cut stones. Sri Lanka produces fancy sapphires in many different colors, as well as blues. Only a few pieces of ruby are found, however. The typical mining in Sri Lanka is in a pit, and they sink a pit down to an alluvial layer. They'll use iron poles, and they'll bang them down into the ground, and then when they hit a quartz layer, the end of the pole gets scratched, and that's when they know they found a layer of gem-bearing gravel that they call elam. Here's some more fine pieces of sapphire. A lot of Sri Lankan sapphire crystals are beautifully twinned. These are growth twins that you can see, and that's one of the nice characteristics of Sri Lankan sapphire. This is an example of a beautifully twinned, spectacular piece that's now in the museum in Beirut, and this is a piece that came out of Elahara in the center part of the island. You can see all the beautiful little terminations. There's not a single ding or nick on this crystal. Really a spectacular piece. Another beautiful twinned crystal, also in Bill Larson's collection. And a few years ago in Kataragama, they were putting a road through, and they hit a pocket of sapphire that was absolutely spectacular. Very glassy crystals, very shiny faces, and this is an example of one of those from Kataragama. They also get a lot of yellow sapphires. I think Sri Lanka is the most prolific source of yellow sapphires. And we've seen pieces as large as 300 carats plus. More examples of the bipyramidal habit for Sri Lankan sapphire. And again, notice the growth twins on the surface of the crystals. Another spectacular piece from Kataragama in the south. When they found this deposit, there was immediately a rush of people, and they started digging all around where the road had been cut through. Then the Sri Lankan government stepped in. They said, whoa, we need to auction off the land. And they auctioned it off for huge prices. The only problem was that there was nothing left. By the time the people got on the land to work it, the pocket was finished. So it was a very small pocket, but spectacular for sapphire specimens. And here's another example of a beautiful piece from Kataragama. Afghanistan is perhaps the most prolific source outside of Burma for ruby specimens. They come out of the marble at a place called Jegdalek, which is right up here. It is an area close to the road between Kabul and the Khyber Pass. And the ruby is mined from a limestone, very similar to Burma. And you can see some nice specimens like this. Unfortunately, that area today is controlled by the Taliban. Another fine piece. Beautiful specimen here from Jegdalek. Here you see a lot of development of the rhombohedral faces, and it's sitting nicely in the marble. Another spectacular piece from Jegdalek. And one more. Most of the Jegdalek rubies are too translucent to cut and polish, which is why we get a lot of nice specimens from Jegdalek. Of course, anything that's found that is cuttable is almost immediately cut. And that's why ruby crystals are among the rarest of all crystals in the mineral collecting world. In fact, I remember Bill Larson, when he was talking to a friend of his, Joel Barch, who was going to be opening a museum in Houston, and Joel said, what do I need to get? And Bill said, you need to get yourself a good ruby, because that's the foundation of any fine mineral collection, and they're extraordinarily rare. Australia is not normally known for sapphire crystals. They do have deposits in New South Wales, New England district here, but it's mostly alluvial material or colluvial material that comes out of basalts. Occasionally in the north, in the Anarchy fields around Sapphire and Ruby Vale, they will get a nice crystal. This is the workings in Ruby Vale. A lot of them are one-man operations. And this is a spectacular piece known as the Tomahawk Tiger. And even though you can see the surfaces are somewhat worn, the zoning pattern is really, really beautiful. 83 carats. The pieces you see behind are more typical of what you would see in Australian sapphire. Normally you don't have a lot of fine crystallization. Laos, north of Thailand, they have a small sapphire deposit. I had a chance to work at that deposit for a couple years. It is at a place called Hue Sai, and that's very close to the infamous Golden Triangle area where the borders of Laos, Thailand, and Burma meet. We mined a lot of sapphire over the 2 years that I worked there, but unfortunately we didn't find many crystals. Almost the first day on the job, I was able to find this crystal, which was very nice. And we pulled the rough that cut this stone also off the belt in the very early days, and the rest of the time we never found anything like this. Madagascar is one of the biggest producers of ruby and sapphire today, and a lot of the photographs that I showed earlier of Madagascar show you how the stones are being mined. It's a spectacular country, and of the landmass of Madagascar, it's about the size of California, and only 10% of that land is not gem-bearing. They find tourmalines, rubies and sapphires, In fact, a friend of mine in Alakaka in the south, in the market one day, he bought a green diamond. So they have a spectacular diversity of minerals. They have green garnets, chrysoberyls, lots of different kinds of things. Quartzes, very famous for quartzes as well. And the main gem-bearing areas, starting in the far north at Diego and Nosy Bay, you find sapphires derived from basalts. As you work your way south, you get less and less iron in the stones, and the quality of the stones improves for the ruby and sapphire. I showed you some pictures of villages out in the jungle. That's a place called Moramang, also known as Sierra Leone. And working your way down south, Didi has produced some very fine ruby and also sapphire. Vatomandri has produced ruby very similar to Burma. But the spectacular finds that were made a decade ago were in the area of Alakaka in the far south. The first place that they found really fine sapphire in Madagascar is at Andronodam, which is in the far south. You can see near Fort Dauphin. This is the Alakaka area, where you find thousands of people mining. It's a very dry area, and they get some fantastic sapphire, some of the best in the world. This is typically the material that you find from Alakaka. Most of it is water-worn, so it's not really of interest for mineral collectors. But if you go further south from there to Andronodam in the far south near Fort Dauphin, you do find some nice sapphire crystals. And this is a group of crystals that come from Andronodam in the far south. Some of the material from the Alakaka area and Andronodam area looks very similar to Kashmir sapphire and fetches very high prices. This is Moramang, further to the north. And in this place, they find an incredible amount of sapphire. I saw people that had buckets full of gem sapphire. Most of it is fancy colors, what they call polychrome. Now here's a nice little ruby from Madagascar, from the Andalamine area. Kashmir in India is so famous for producing the world's finest cut sapphires. This deposit was discovered in the 1880s in an area just north of Zanskar. It's not too far from the Pakistan border, and so it's been very, very difficult politically to visit the area in the last few decades. The place where it is located, looks like this has died. The place where it is located is a place called Sumcham. You can see in the very far north. That area of Kashmir is disputed with Pakistan. When India split up in the 1940s, Pakistan took the Muslim areas, India took the Hindu areas, and Kashmir was a Muslim area that was controlled by a Maharaja who was Hindu. And he decided to take Kashmir into India, and the result has been a 70-year war over this territory. So it's very difficult to visit. The mines are at 14,000 feet elevation, and so it's very hard to mine. There are no roads that go there. It is a pegmatite area, and there is a vein of actinolite tremolite that has desilicified areas in it that are pegmatite, and the sapphire is found in those pockets. But because of the elevation and because of the political problems, it's very, very difficult to visit. They do produce some nice specimens, however, and they're very distinctive. This is where the mine is actually located, and it's located, if you can look up on the side of the mountain there, you can see the tailings areas, and that is where the mining is done. The mining is only done a few months of the year because of the snow, and there is a bunch of Indian soldiers that are stationed there year-round so that people don't come in and dig illegally. This is an example of Kashmir sapphire, what it looks like in both the rough and the cut. There is a clay on the outside of the crystals that's very distinctive, and there's really no other deposit in the world that looks like this. And so it's very easy to recognize Kashmir if it is in the rough state. Once it gets cut, it becomes much more difficult to recognize, and there's a lot of Madagascar and Sri Lankan sapphire that looks very similar to Kashmir sapphire. Tanzania is a prolific location for corundum crystals. There are a lot of different localities again. Tanzania might have more corundum localities than any other country in the world. You can see down in the south, Songea and Tunduru. Songea produces dark reds and green colors. Tunduru produces material very similar to Sri Lanka, violets, nice blues, some of which look like Burmese blues. Lots of different colors come from Tunduru. Mahenge, in the center of the country, is very famous for producing spinel. And a few years ago, in 2007, they found a series of spectacular spinel crystals, the largest of which was about 52 kilos. And the quality of these stones was incredible, and we have seen, since that discovery in 2007, we've seen spinel prices probably go up by 5 to 10 times, in part a result of the attention because of these spectacular crystals that were found. A few years ago, in a place called Windsor, they found ruby, and that was also a major find. In Windsor, you do get some very fine specimen-grade ruby. I visited Windsor with my daughter a few years ago, and we met this gentleman. You can see that his house is the Embassy of the United States, and his name actually was Obama. And this is an example of a Windsor specimen. Some of the crystals have blue with the red, others are completely red. Very nice piece. These are more specimens from Windsor. And another specimen from Windsor. In the area of Mount Kilimanjaro, there is also a ruby mine, and it's actually the earliest discovery of ruby in East Africa. It's at a place called Longido, right at the bottom of Kilimanjaro. And it produces ruby in a green rock that's rich in zoisite. And you've no doubt seen specimens of this. It's used as a carving material very often. The Maasai people in that area mine the stone. They get an occasional faceted stone, but most of the material is used as carving material. And here you can see a nice example of that. Those of you who know Abe Suleiman, that's his son. Of course, closer to home, we also have some nice sapphire in Montana. There are 3 different places where gem quality sapphire is mined in Montana. The first being along the gravel bars on the Missouri River. And those have been mined for more than 100 years. Further to the west, in the Phillipsburg area, you have a place called Rock Creek, which has one of the highest concentrations of sapphire in the world. And then more to the eastern side, you have a place that's been mined for over 120 years that produces fine blue sapphires, Yogo Gulch. Yogo Gulch, the stones are not very large, and so if you can cut a 1-carat stone, that's considered to be a very, very large stone. They fetch big prices here in the United States. This is a gentleman who used to operate the Yogo deposit, a man named Mike Roberts, and he was mining all by himself, and I spent a day with him a few years ago, and it was incredible what he could do all by himself. He had a little front-end loader, and he would pull the ore out of the mine, let it sit for a few weeks, and it would break down, and then he'd run it through his jig, and he was getting all kinds of sapphire. Unfortunately, a few years ago, he died when the mine caved in on him. But just this week, I learned that a company in Bozeman, a jeweler in Bozeman, has purchased the Yogo deposit from his family. And so we may start to see Yogo stones come on the market again. And this is Mike Roberts holding a handful of his sapphire with one piece in the original matrix. This is also said to be a Yogo sapphire. I kind of have my doubts about it because I've never seen one that looks like that. But it is said to be a Yogo sapphire. This is more typical of the material that comes from the Missouri River. And you don't find really nice crystal shapes because a lot of this material comes out of almost a semi-volcanic environment. They're metamorphic sapphire, but they've been eroded in the ground, and so you don't find the really nice shapes and shiny crystal faces. This is a Yogo sapphire that formed in a Star of David pattern. Most of the Yogo sapphire is very, very small and very thin plates, and so the cutting yield is very small. Nepal has some very interesting ruby specimens. They don't get much cutting material, but the specimens are unlike almost any other place in the world. The place is called Chumar, and it's in Ganesh Himal, if you know the Himalayas or Nepal. It's in between the Langtang and the Annapurna ranges, and they do get some very nice specimens. The material is very high up in the mines are very high in the Himalaya, and so in order to get there, it's several days' walk. Not an easy task, but they do get these wonderful intergrown ruby crystals. This is a piece, again, from Bill Larson's collection. Here's another piece showing it in the original matrix. And it is a calcite matrix. All of these Himalayan rubies, they all form in a very similar geologic environment. Of course, Myanmar, Burma, is very famous, probably the most famous place for ruby and sapphire. And the main place where corundum has been found throughout time is the Mogok area, just northeast of Mandalay. A couple decades ago, they also found ruby at a place called Maishu in the Shan State. That's produced a lot of cuttable material, but not much in the way of specimens. Mogok remains today the best place for specimens of ruby and sapphire from Burma. And here you can see the type of mining that goes on in the Mogok area. This picture was shot about a year ago. They produce this wonderful rubies, and many times you can get them attached to the marble matrix. And so these are some of the finest specimens that you will find around the world for ruby. Here's another great piece, 5.7 centimeters high, sitting up on the marble. And it shows that classic appearance that Mogok ruby has with the stepped growth planes. Another beautiful piece in the marble. The marble in Mogok area is the most coarse marble I've ever seen in any locality. In fact, at the Datop area, you will find calcite crystals that form the marble that are as big as a fist in size. It's an incredibly coarse-grained marble, and that's one of the reasons why you find these beautiful crystals, because it crystallizes very slowly. And this is a piece that is now in the Mike Scott collection. My wife is holding it. It's a piece that Bill brought back from Burma, known as Big Mama. Another beautiful piece of ruby from Mogok. And here again, you can see these stepped growth planes that are very characteristic of Burmese ruby crystals. Another fine piece from Bill's collection. And a piece not on the matrix, but again, you can see that classic stepped growth, and you can also see the rutile silk causing that sheen inside the stone. This is one of my favorite of all pieces. This is a piece that passed through Bill's hands again, and it is a ruby on Balleranoite, and that's sitting on top of the calcite. And you can see how gemmy the ruby is. Really an incredible specimen. This photo was taken by Bob Weldon. What about sapphire from Mogok? Yeah, they have that too. They have some really fine sapphire and some fine sapphire specimens. And here you can see some examples. So that's a 3-carat cut stone along with a 3.5 centimeter high sapphire crystal. You'll see that the sapphires from the Mogok area are a little bit less complex than those that come out of Sri Lanka. But this is an amazing piece, also I think from Bill's collection, and not gem quality, but for the way it sits up on the rock like that is really an incredible piece. And this is one that I think Bill had this piece and he sold it to somebody else, is that right? And then he bought it back. And whenever you want to sell it again, Bill, let me know, because this is a very rare color change sapphire from the Mogok area. It's colored by vanadium. And those of you who are gemologists, you might know that synthetic corundum, they make a color change colored by vanadium. And in Mogok, they find some natural ones on occasion as well. And here you can see the change in color. Really a nice piece. And again, you can see the sapphire crystals in the Mogok area are less complex than those from Sri Lanka, which is one of the ways that you can tell them apart. If you want to know more about that, please ask Bill because he's the expert on that. If you like the kinds of things that I'm telling you here today, a lot of this is contained in my 2 books that are in print. I do have one of them, a few copies for sale here at this conference, and so if you like that, you might enjoy these books. I'd like to change gears a little bit and talk about something that's entirely unrelated to crystals, something I call field of view. You know, with a microscope, you can see incredible detail, but without it, you can see a lot further, and that's field of view. A friend of mine, John Saul, he has a ruby mine named after him in Kenya. He was one of the first people to prospect, along with Campbell Bridges and a few others, to prospect gem minerals in East Africa. And he was heavily involved in the discovery of tanzanite and the ruby mine that is named after him. John, as a graduate student, he did his graduate studies in Western Africa. And while he was there, he was talking to some of the local tribes people, and they were explaining to him their cosmology. They were explaining to him about where they felt that they had come from. And he found it very interesting because he had talked to Chinese people halfway around the world, and they had the same explanation. And so he started to study this, and he wrote a book about it, which is called The Tale Told in All Lands. And this is a book that asks very big questions. He has a big, big field of view. Questions like, why are we here? How did we get here? Where do we come from? He's written another book, a much smaller book, called A Geologist Speculates. And that's a free download on my website, lotusgemology.com. And so if you want to explore this further, you can download the PDF for free. According to John, geology is very simple. Geology is just history, but it's history of the earth. So let's go through some of that history. The earth is about 4.6 billion years old. Shortly after the earth formed, there was a heavy bombardment, and that's when Earth acquired water and hydrocarbons from deep space. About 4 to 3 billion years ago, single-celled microbes began to appear deep inside the Earth. 2.3 billion years ago, they had something called the Great Oxidation Event, where bacteria that could actually produce oxygen started to develop. 2.1 billion years ago, multicellular life started to appear on our planet. 700 to 550 million years ago, plate tectonics started to shift into high gear. This resulted in one part of Gondwana land going down under another, and it created this huge supermountain. Then we had the second great oxidation event. As the supermountain eroded, it sent oxygen into the oceans. The result of that was the Cambrian explosion, where we had large, active, multicellular life appearing for the first time. 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs were gone. 2.5 million years ago, approximately, the first members of our species began to appear. 33,000 years ago, we find the birth of religion, where we find evidence of human ritual. 5,000 years ago, high culture, Mesopotamia. We have writing. It's not a long time ago when you consider it. So we've gone from 4.6 billion years. For the vast majority of the Earth's existence, there was no complex life. And there were also no crystalline colored gemstones, with just a few exceptions. So, the same time that we find crystalline colored gemstones appearing, we find the birth of life. And it's really no joke to say that the two are interconnected with one another. The first science, what was it? Well, look at the number 7. We have 7 days in a week. Why do we have that? Why don't we have 8 days? Why not 9? Why not 4? If you look at this, you can see the names of our days. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You can see it better if you look at it in French. Lundi, mardi, mercredi. These are the things that people could see in ancient times in the sky. They could see 7 objects in the sky, and that's why we have 7 days in our week. The first science was astronomy. I remember I was on a journey to the Burmese jade mines, and we had been slogging through the mud for several days. We arrived in a small village in Upper Burma, and we had to resupply, and we bought some batteries in the market. And my friend and I were looking at them, and we thought, oh, what is this? What kind of a brand is that? Moon Rabbit batteries. We were laughing about it, and our Burmese friend said, well, actually, we believe there's a rabbit on the moon. Interesting concept, isn't it? Monday, Moon Day. If you translate the name Chantaburi in Thailand, which is a big gem center, Chan is from Sanskrit. It means moon. Chantaburi means moon town. And if you look at the symbol of the town, it's a picture of the moon with a rabbit on it. Well, why would a rabbit be associated with the moon? Interesting. 31 days, what's that? Well, we know it as the time of a month, right? That's what a month is, 31 days, give or take. That's also the gestation period of a rabbit. It's not that there's a rabbit on the moon, even though many cultures believe that. But the moon was associated with fertility with the rabbit. Rabbits are interesting creatures. They can actually be pregnant, and they can get pregnant again before they give birth. That's strange, isn't it? So the rabbit is an ancient symbol of fertility. And that's where we get our Easter bunny from. Of course, Easter is not the day that Christ rose from the dead, but it's the day when the days are, it's halfway between the longest and the shortest day of the year. In the same way, Christmas was not the day that Christ was born, but it was the shortest day of the year, basically. These are all very old, ancient ideas. You can see Gondwana land, and here's where you find all of these crystalline colored gemstones that all formed about the same time as human life, or as multicellular life. You can see India, how it floated north. All of this is flat, and then you have this humongous mountain chain that grew up at the Himalayas because the Indian subcontinent slipped below the Asian continent. And what's really fascinating is if you look at Mount Everest carefully, you can see a yellow band just under the top. That's sandstone. Now, how do you get a sedimentary rock on the top of the earth, the roof of the earth? If you look above the sandstone, you find limestone, and you can actually find marine fossils. Because of this incredible collision, the Tethys Sea was pushed upwards, and that's how you get that. And that produced all these wonderful deposits of ruby. Well, all these kinds of stories about where things come from, this is like the ultimate heresy, isn't it? That there's a war between science and religion, that science and religion are opponents. And what is interesting is that John Saul has written that they're not really opponents at all. They're archers shooting at the same target. Evolution is simply adaptation where action produces a reaction, and you have this human versus animal competition. Science and religion are reactions to a discovery. Think back to those people in West Africa and what they told John Saul about their cosmology, and then the Chinese halfway around the world. What was the discovery? The first big idea, according to John Saul, the difference between humans and animals is that we can share complex ideas. You can say all you want about how smart elephants are, or dolphins, or whales, or whatever, but they're nowhere near as smart as human beings because we can share with one another complex ideas. What was the first big idea that we shared with one another? Well, according to John Saul, it was the idea, the realization that we're going to die. And this came in an evolutionary process, and so it happened about the same time around the world. And the reaction was a common reaction wherever this realization appeared. Here's a clue. What dies and is then reborn? Here's another clue from the Lord's Prayer. On earth as it is in heaven. On earth as it is in heaven. When human beings realized they were going to die, they looked around their world to find something that died and then was reborn. And they looked to the heavens, and they saw the sun comes up, it goes down, it comes back, it's reborn. And they thought, if we can only recreate heaven on earth, we can escape death, we can cheat death. That was the first big idea shared by human beings. That, according to John Saul, was the story told around the world. And wherever you go in the world, you find the same kind of thing, from the Taj Mahal, Angkor Wat, Stonehenge, the pyramids, Jerusalem. These are all things that are made in a certain way as a recreation of what human beings saw in the sky. As above, so below, even in Washington, D.C. That's the story told around the world. Let me tell you a little bit about my gemology. A number of years ago, I was camping with a friend in Joshua Tree in California. And as we were out there that night, we could see the sky turning overhead. We could see the Milky Way. And we just sat there looking at it in rapture. We don't see that so often nowadays because of light pollution, and you have to go certain places to try and capture that thing that was out there all the time for the ancient people. And as we were looking at this and my conscience was turning, my friend said to me, "This is out here every night. All you have to do is raise your eyes above the horizon. Up above, it's so simple, so elegant, and down below. Every day I get the chance to look at frozen time or inner space. I look through my microscope and I can see these things that formed millions or even billions of years ago in some cases. And they're like pieces of frozen time. I can go back in time as I look, and I can almost see Gondwana land and the continents separating. I can see India plunging underneath the Asian plate. Thanks very much.
connect your computer? I'll let you do it.